When my husband brought the little girl into our house, I was in the kitchen cutting our son's 5th birthday cake. The girl looked about 4. She wore a gray coat that hung past her wrists and clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She stayed half hidden behind Daniel's leg, showing me only one pale cheek and a pair of frightened brown eyes. Daniel did not ask whether she could come in. He set a small pink suitcase beside the front door as if he were closing a deal that had already been approved. "Her name is Lily," he said. "She's going to live with us from now on." I was still holding the cake knife. "What does that mean?" "My cousin and her husband were killed in a car accident last month. Lily has no one else who can take her. She's almost Noah's age. They can grow up together." Then he smiled, as if he had solved a problem for me. "You always said you wished we'd had a daughter. Now we have one of each." It was Noah's birthday. The dining room was decorated with paper dinosaurs. A banner above the window read, "Happy Birthday, Noah." I had stayed up until 2 in the morning icing a green cake because he had changed his mind 3 times about whether the volcano should be red or orange. Daniel needed less than a minute to place another child inside our family and call it the answer to one of my regrets. I did not dislike Lily. She was a child who had apparently lost both parents. None of this was her fault. What frightened me was that Daniel had already decided what my life would look like before telling me. "Who approved this placement?" I asked quietly. "Has child welfare been here? What about her insurance, school records, medical history, and trauma counseling? You cannot bring a grieving child home and assume I will rearrange my career to become her primary caregiver." The warmth left his face. "Claire, she just lost her parents. Your first thought is paperwork and your job." He knew exactly where to place the knife. I was a cardiothoracic surgeon. After Noah was born, I had stepped away from the operating room and moved into research and hospital administration so I could be available for him. I had passed up one promotion and delayed my return to surgery twice. I was also a co-founder and 42% shareholder of Reed Medical Technologies, the company Daniel now ran as chief executive officer. My parents had provided the seed money. I had helped develop the clinical partnerships that gave the company credibility. But after Noah's birth, I let Daniel handle the daily business while I moved farther and farther away from the boardroom. He had grown used to my sacrifices. Somewhere along the way, he had begun treating them as proof that my time belonged to him. "I am thinking about what happens to her after tonight," I said. "Not where she sleeps for one evening." He did not answer. 30 minutes later, a social worker arrived at our door. That was when I learned Daniel had applied for emergency kinship placement 3 days earlier. He had listed me as the primary caregiver on the preliminary documents without asking me. The placement would last 30 days while the state reviewed our home and scheduled a guardianship hearing. There was already a line waiting for my signature. Daniel had not acted on impulse. He had planned everything. The social worker walked through our home with a clipboard while Daniel followed her, answering questions that should have been directed to me. "Did we have a spare bedroom?" "Yes," he said, even though the room was still my home office and contained boxes of medical journals. "Could one parent attend weekly trauma appointments?" "Of course," he said, glancing at me as though my schedule had already been cleared. "Did we have a reliable support network?" "Absolutely." His parents lived nearby. Richard and his wife had not offered to take Lily for a single night. When the social worker asked how Noah felt about the arrangement, Daniel called him into the room and placed one hand on his shoulder. "He is excited to have a sister," he said. Noah looked up at him, confused. He had met Lily less than an hour earlier. I interrupted before the child felt forced to agree. "He is still processing it," I said. "We all are." The social worker's eyes moved from Daniel to me. She made a note. Later, after she left, Daniel told me I had made us look divided. "We are divided," I said. "You filed documents in my name without telling me. I knew you would do the right thing once you saw her." That sentence stayed with me. He had not trusted me with the truth, but he had been certain he could use my conscience to secure my cooperation. That evening, his father called. Richard Reed was chairman of Reed Medical Technologies and one of its largest outside investors. The company was preparing for its 10th anniversary gala, where Daniel planned to announce a major new funding round. Richard's name, reputation, and political connections were woven into nearly every page of the investor packet. "Claire," Richard said in the warm, controlled voice he used with donors, "the Reeds do not abandon their own. Daniel trusts you because you have always been the kindest person in this family." I understood the threat beneath the compliment. If I refused, I would not be a woman questioning a rushed and deceptive placement. I would be the cold wife who rejected an orphan and damaged the family's public image weeks before the biggest night in the company's history. I signed the temporary papers. Not because Daniel and Richard had shamed me into it. I signed because, later that night, Lily had a nightmare. She stood outside our bedroom without knocking, barefoot on the hallway floor. When I opened the door, she looked down and whispered, "Can I sleep on the rug? I promise I won't make the bed dirty." I crouched and pulled her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing. Whatever the adults had hidden, she should not have to pay for it. Over the next several weeks, I bought clothes that fit her, arranged an evaluation with a childhood trauma therapist, gathered her vaccination records, and helped transfer her to Noah's preschool. I learned that she hated peas, loved strawberry yogurt, and slept better if the hallway lights stayed on. I was the one who actually cared for both children. Daniel left at 7 each morning and rarely returned before 9 at night. Breakfast, drop-off, parent meetings, therapy appointments, fevers, nightmares, and bedtime routines all landed on me. Yet, even though he did almost none of the daily work, he was intensely protective of Lily. On Noah's birthday, Daniel had given our son a box of building blocks. For Lily, he brought home 3 dresses, a talking doll, and a silver bracelet engraved with her name. Noah stared at the pile of gifts. "Dad," he said softly, "isn't today my birthday?" Daniel paused, then rubbed the top of his head. "You're the big brother now. Lily just lost her mom and dad. She needs extra love." A week later, the children argued over a remote control truck my brother had mailed from Boston. Noah said Lily could have a turn after he finished one race. Daniel came into the room, took the controller from Noah's hand, and gave it to Lily. "Don't be selfish." Noah did not cry in front of him. He only stared at his empty hands. That night, he climbed into my bed and pressed his face against my shoulder. "Mom, if Lily is sadder than me, does Dad not have to love me anymore?" I held him until his breathing slowed, and for the first time since Lily arrived, my sympathy for Daniel's difficult situation gave way to anger. The next morning, I told him he could not keep using Lily's grief to force Noah to surrender everything. Daniel looked at me as if I had admitted something ugly. "Are you afraid she'll take part of Noah's inheritance? Is that what this is really about?" I could hardly believe him. I bought her clothes. I arranged her school. I sit with her when she wakes up screaming. "You do not get to accuse me of resenting a child while I do all the work. You have never truly accepted her as your daughter." He said it too quickly, like a line he had rehearsed. I studied his face. Why was it so important to Daniel that I think of Lily as my biological child? Unless, in his mind, she had always belonged in our home. A few weeks later, Lily was hospitalized with viral pneumonia. Daniel was in San Francisco meeting investors. I spent the night in the emergency department with a feverish little girl in my arms and a sleepy 5-year-old holding onto my coat. By the time Lily was admitted, I had been awake for nearly 20 hours. Daniel flew back the next morning. His first question was not whether Lily was stable. He did not ask whether I had slept or whether Noah had eaten. He stood in the hospital corridor and said, in front of 2 nurses, "I leave for 2 days, and she ends up in the hospital?" I thought I had misheard him. The doctor said the infection had been developing for at least a week. This is not because I failed to watch her. If you had really been paying attention, it would not have become this serious. I brought her here in the middle of the night. I signed the admission forms. I stayed beside her while you were drinking wine with investors. You did not even know she had been coughing. His eyes turned cold. Don't treat her differently because she isn't yours. One day, you're going to regret the way you're acting. There it was again. You will regret it. I did not keep arguing. I went back into Lily's room and sat beside her bed. In the dim light, I studied her face more carefully than I ever had before. The bridge of her nose, the shape of her chin, Even the small crease between her brows reminded me of Daniel. I knew that a private DNA test would not prove anything in court. I knew samples could be contaminated and identities challenged. But I needed to know whether my suspicion was entirely irrational. I used a licensed private laboratory for a non-legal kinship screening. Lily's sample came from a baby tooth she had recently lost and a cheek swab I collected with her cooperation. Daniel's sample came from residue on a grooming tool and a drinking cup. When the report arrived, I read it in my car in the hospital parking garage. The conclusion was clear. Daniel was not Lily's biological father. I should have felt relieved. Instead, the fear inside me became heavier. If she was not his daughter, why did he protect her like a man trying to repair years of neglect? I locked the report in a document box in my car and planned to speak with him after I had time to think. 2 days later, his vehicle went into the shop and he borrowed mine. That evening, he threw the report onto our dining table. "You did this behind my back?" His face did not show the outrage of an innocent husband falsely accused. It showed panic. "The report says you are not her father," I said. "Shouldn't you be relieved?" "Why would I be relieved?" "It proves you never trusted me." He tore the paper in half, then into quarters. I watched the pieces fall to the floor and felt the last of my hope disappear. An innocent man might be angry, but he would not be terrified of evidence that cleared him. I began looking into the story Daniel had told me about Lily. The couple listed as her parents had existed, and they had died in a traffic accident. But they were not her biological parents. They had been unable to have children and had privately adopted a baby girl 4 years earlier. The attorney who arranged that adoption had handled Richard's personal assets for more than a decade. At that point, I stopped collecting samples on my own. I gave everything I had found to a family law attorney. She asked Child Welfare to review the kinship placement and petitioned the court to verify Lily's biological identity. After a judge issued the necessary orders, an accredited laboratory collected new samples from Lily, Daniel, and Richard under documented chain of custody procedures. The judicial report arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Richard and Lily had a greater than 99.9% probability of a biological father-daughter relationship. Lily was not Daniel's secret child. She was his half-sister. The report gave my attorney enough leverage to obtain additional records from the private adoption file. Lily's biological mother had been a 26-year-old event coordinator named Jenna Moore. She had worked on several Reed Foundation fundraisers and became pregnant during the year Richard traveled constantly while his wife was undergoing cancer treatment. Jenna died from an overdose when Lily was 8 months old. The medical examiner classified the death as accidental. Within 2 weeks, Richard's attorney arranged for one of his distant relatives to adopt the baby. Richard paid the couple's mortgage through a trust and required them to sign a broad confidentiality agreement. Nothing in the record suggested that Jenna's relatives had been told Richard was Lily's father. The entire arrangement had been designed to make the child disappear without ever becoming legally connected to him. When the adoptive parents died, their estate attorney notified Richard's office because of the trust. Richard then gave Daniel a choice: place Lily quietly inside our household, or risk the adoption documents becoming part of a public probate case. That explained the speed. It explained the lawyer. It explained why Daniel had completed the placement paperwork before Lily ever crossed our threshold. I put a copy of the court-certified report in front of Daniel that night. He glanced at it once and did not deny anything. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "I was going to tell you when the time was right." "When would that have been? After I raised your father's child to adulthood? Or after she spent her whole life believing you were her father?" Daniel lowered his voice. "My father made a mistake years ago. Lily's biological mother died, so relatives adopted her. When they were killed, she had nowhere else to go. So you sent her to me. She is innocent. I have never blamed Lily." My voice was shaking, but I kept it quiet. "I blame you. You put my name on documents as her primary caregiver and never told me who she was. You were not protecting a child. You were protecting Richard from a scandal that could damage the funding round and the board vote." Daniel finally admitted the bargain. Richard had promised to transfer additional voting rights to him if Daniel made sure Lily was quietly placed in a respectable home. No reporters. No paternity case. No public questions about why a married businessman had fathered a child with a much younger woman. The family had planned to feature our compassionate adoption at the 10th anniversary gala. Their act of kindness was a transaction. "You've cared for her for months," Daniel said. "Does the truth really change anything now?" I laughed because the alternative was screaming. "Of course it does not change anything for you. It was not your career, time, or dignity that was taken without permission. Do not make this uglier than it has to be. We are still a family. If we are a family, why am I always the last person allowed to know the truth?" I told him I wanted a separation and that Lily's placement would be reviewed. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely afraid. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. "You cannot leave right now. The financing closes next month. My father is transferring his votes. If you stay quiet, this all passes." I pulled free. "You are not afraid of losing me. You are afraid of losing the company and your father." I turned toward the children's room. Behind me, Daniel said, "You can investigate me. You can hate me. But do not drag Noah into this." I stopped walking. I had never mentioned investigating Noah. That night, I barely slept. Noah was the child I had carried for 9 months. At least, that was what I had believed. 5 years earlier, I had suffered a placental abruption and undergone an emergency cesarean section. I lost so much blood that I did not wake until the following day. A nurse placed Noah in my arms while Daniel stood beside the bed, red-eyed, telling me our son was healthy. I had never seen the baby taken from my body. I did not remember hearing his first cry. The thought made me feel sick. It also made me hate myself for allowing a husband's suspicious sentence to contaminate every memory of my son's birth. I tried to tell myself that one lie did not mean every part of my life was false. But Daniel's warning would not leave me. I arranged another private family screening. The results said Daniel and Noah were biologically related as father and son. It also said I was not Noah's biological mother. For several minutes, I sat at my desk without moving. Then I opened the drawer where I kept a hospital bracelet, a lock of Noah's baby hair, and the small card on which a nurse had stamped his newborn footprints. I pressed my thumb against one of those faded blueprints. I had built an entire memory around objects other people handed me. Daniel had told me the baby was mine. A nurse had placed him against my chest. My family had taken photographs. Because everyone behaved as though the story were true, I had never considered that the child in my arms might have entered the room through another door. My first emotion was not anger. It was guilt. I looked at Noah's school picture and hated myself for the thought that had flashed through my mind, not mine. He was mine in every way a 5-year-old understood. I knew which cereal he would eat only from the blue bowl, which dinosaur facts he repeated when nervous, and how he pretended not to need the nightlight after Daniel called him a big boy. None of that vanished because a laboratory had identified a crime committed before he could open his eyes. But somewhere, another child had my blood, my medical history, and perhaps my same fear of thunderstorms. I read the report again and again until the letters blurred. For 5 years, I had given up coffee because he was a difficult pregnancy. I had turned down promotions, slept in hospital chairs, and cried when he first called me mom. I knew the exact song that calmed him during storms and the shape his mouth made when he was trying not to laugh. He was my son. But my body, my medical records, and the scar across my abdomen all told me there should be another child somewhere. Where was the baby I had delivered? I did not take the private report home and confront Daniel. I called my attorney. Then I requested my delivery records through formal hospital channels. The private hospital where Noah was born had since been purchased by a larger medical group, but archive system access logs were still available. On the surface, the chart looked normal. After my attorney obtained a court order, the hospital's information security team discovered that my newborn's identification number had been changed twice within 6 hours of delivery. The wristband print history did not match the nursery transfer record. There was also an unexplained 15-minute gap during which my baby was not electronically accounted for. The obstetrician on duty that night was Daniel's aunt, Margaret Reed. In the operating room next to mine, a woman named Vanessa Cole had undergone a scheduled cesarean and delivered a boy. Vanessa had been Daniel's girlfriend in college. He had always told me I was his first love. By then, I no longer felt surprise in the ordinary sense. My marriage felt like a house whose lights had suddenly gone out. Every room I once thought was warm now held strangers. A judge ordered legal DNA testing for me, Daniel, and Noah. The accredited laboratory confirmed that Daniel was Noah's biological father. I was not his biological mother. My attorney then traced payments from a shell company Daniel controlled. For 5 years, that company had sent Vanessa monthly transfers. During the first year, it had also paid a 7-figure settlement large enough to buy an apartment. The money was not child support. It was the price of an exchange. Daniel and Vanessa had never truly ended their relationship after college. Even after he married me, they continued seeing each other. When Vanessa became pregnant, she demanded that Daniel leave me and threatened to expose the affair. At the time, Reed Medical Technologies was preparing for its first major funding round. My parents were early investors and had introduced the company to hospital systems that became its most valuable clients. Daniel did not want to lose the marriage that gave him money, credibility, and access. He also did not want to lose the baby Vanessa was carrying. Vanessa originally believed the pregnancy would make her the next Mrs. Reed. When she realized Daniel would never divorce me, she changed her price. She demanded an apartment, a 7-figure settlement, and 5 years of continued payments. She did not want to raise a child alone. She wanted compensation for the future she believed Daniel had stolen from her. Daniel wanted his son to enter the Reed family as a legitimate heir. Margaret used her hospital access to alter wristbands and newborn records. I had given birth to a girl. Vanessa had given birth to Noah. They brought Noah to my room and let Vanessa leave with my daughter so the hospital records would still show one baby departing with each mother. In Daniel's mind, it was a transaction in which no one important lost anything. I received the son I had once said I hoped for. Vanessa received money. Daniel's biological child received my name, my home, and my family's resources. Daniel kept his marriage, his company, and his carefully constructed public life. The only people who lost the right to choose were me and the newborn girl who had been carried out of the hospital in another woman's arms. The most disgusting part was that Daniel had not seen my daughter in 5 years. Vanessa sent him occasional photographs of a child's back, blurred videos, and edited medical bills to prove that the girl was healthy. Investigators later learned that most of the photographs showed a relative's child. The bills had been altered. Daniel avoided visiting because travel, hotel, and communication records might expose him. He told himself the payments were proof that he had fulfilled his responsibility. He did not care whether my daughter was loved. He cared whether Vanessa remained silent. 6 months earlier, Vanessa had demanded another large payment and threatened to reveal everything before the company's anniversary gala. Daniel refused. She disappeared. That same month, Lily's adoptive parents died, and Richard ordered Daniel to bring a second family secret into our home. 2 lies were collapsing at once. That was why Daniel had become so desperate and cruel. When I returned home, he was sitting on the living room floor building a block tower with the children. Noah saw me and ran into my arms. "Mom, why didn't you come home last night?" I knelt and held him so tightly that he complained he could not breathe. Tears fell into his hair. Whatever his DNA said, he had taken no part in any deception. I kissed his forehead and asked the nanny to take both children into the garden. Then I placed the legal DNA report and hospital access logs in front of Daniel. His face lost all color. "Where is my daughter?" I asked. He did not answer. "I am asking once. Where is the child I gave birth to 5 years ago?" He stood and tried to approach me. "Claire, you need to calm down. It is not what you think." "Then tell me what it is. Did you replace my baby with Vanessa's son while I was unconscious?" "I never meant to hurt you." "Where is my daughter?" After a long silence, he said, "Vanessa took her. And you have not seen her in 5 years." His mouth moved, but no words came. I realized he was not worth the energy it would take to strike him. "You always said you wanted a boy," he said, his eyes wet. "Noah has been yours since the day he was born. He loves you. You love him. Does biology really matter that much?" Nausea rolled through me. If biology does not matter, why did you steal my daughter to make room for your son? He had no answer. I left the house with Noah that evening. Child welfare immediately reassessed Lily's placement. Daniel had concealed her true family relationship. Richard refused to acknowledge her publicly and tried to use attorneys to keep her under Daniel's name. The original kinship placement had been built on false information, and I was now involved in a separation, a custody dispute, and a missing child investigation. For the moment, Lily was placed with foster parents trained in trauma care. Before she left, she held onto the sleeve of my coat. Is it because I was bad? Is that why you don't want me? I knelt in front of her. No. Adults made serious mistakes. You did nothing wrong. She threw her arms around my neck and sobbed. I cried with her. I could not continue pretending to be her mother inside a lie. But I would not let the Reeds move her around again as if she were inconvenient luggage. Finding my daughter took longer than I had imagined. My attorney traced Vanessa through false names used on bank accounts, but sealed adoption records could not simply be opened because I asked. Police first had to establish probable cause for newborn identity fraud and unlawful child transfer. A prosecutor then petitioned family court to unseal specific records. We learned that less than 2 months after Vanessa received the first settlement payment, she had surrendered the baby to a private adoption agency in Oregon, claiming she was a single mother unable to provide care. She used a false name and gave no information about the father. The baby had been legally adopted by an elementary school teacher in Portland. Her name was Sophie. The name was all we were initially allowed to know. The agency refused to release her address until the court determined that contact would not destabilize her adoption. Rachel's attorney argued that Sophie had already survived one abandonment and should not be exposed to another adult claiming a parental role without a clear long-term plan. I did not resent her for that argument. It was exactly what a good mother should have done. During the first case conference, Rachel joined by video. She looked tired and guarded. She asked me whether I intended to demand immediate custody. I do not know what I am entitled to ask for yet, I admitted. But I know what Sophie is entitled to. She is entitled not to have her life destroyed because adults lied before she was born. Rachel's expression changed slightly. She asked whether I had known about the adoption. I said no. She asked whether I had signed anything. I said no. Then she covered her mouth and looked away from the camera. The adoption agency had told her Sophie's birth mother was a young woman who chose adoption voluntarily and did not wish to be contacted. Rachel had spent years believing that somewhere a woman had made a painful but loving decision. Now she was learning that the papers supporting her family might have begun with a kidnapping. The court appointed an independent attorney for Sophie. That attorney insisted on a gradual process, verified DNA, psychological evaluation, separate interviews, and a written contact plan. Each step felt unbearably slow to me, but I understood why speed could become another form of violence. Nearly 4 months passed between the discovery of the records and our first meeting. Child welfare, the adoption agency, both sets of lawyers, and a child psychologist coordinated the process. A legal DNA test confirmed that Sophie was my biological daughter. Then the psychologist helped decide how to tell a 5-year-old that the story of her birth might involve a crime. I first saw Sophie on a rainy Sunday afternoon. She wore yellow rain boots and was crouched in a small garden, building a house for a snail out of wet leaves. When she looked up at me, I forgot how to breathe. She had my eyes. When she pressed her lips together, the left corner lifted exactly the way my mother's did. But she did not run to me. She did not call me Mom. She moved behind the woman standing beside her and whispered, "Who is she?" Rachel was gentle, observant, and stronger than she first appeared. She had adopted Sophie legally. She had sat through every fever, nightmare, school meeting, and birthday. She had saved Sophie's first drawings, first lost tooth, and first day of school photograph. Rachel had not stolen my child. She was the person who had truly loved Sophie during the 5 years when I did not even know where my daughter was. At first, Rachel feared I would ask the court to invalidate the adoption and remove Sophie from the only home she remembered. I placed the legal papers on her kitchen table, but I did not demand that she hand over my child. I will not appear in her life and tear her away from you, I said. I want the court to recognize what happened to us. I want her to know one day that I did not abandon her. But she is not property that must change homes the moment she is found. Rachel watched me for a long time. Then her eyes filled with tears. Then we start in the way she can survive, she said. We began with one video call a week. Before each call, a therapist reminded me not to ask Sophie whether she remembered me, not to tell her she looked like me, and not to use the word daughter unless she introduced it first. Those rules hurt, but they protected her from feeling responsible for my grief. The first time the screen connected, Sophie sat so close to Rachel that only half her face was visible. Hi, I said. Hi. Rachel says you like animals. Sophie nodded. What is your favorite? Snails. I had prepared questions about school, books, and cartoons. Every one of them disappeared from my mind. Snails are excellent, I said. They carry their homes with them. She considered this and then corrected me. The shell is part of their body. It is not really a house. Rachel smiled for the first time. At first, Sophie called me Claire and answered most questions with one word. She liked horses, hated tomatoes, and believed every doctor worked with babies because the only doctor she knew personally was her pediatrician. On our third call, she showed me the snail house she had rebuilt after the rain washed it away. On our fifth, she asked whether I had liked yellow boots when I was little. On our seventh, she allowed me to read her a bedtime story through the screen. Later, I joined Rachel and Sophie at the zoo. Sophie held Rachel's hand, not mine. I did not ask her to change that. When rain began, she moved her umbrella so half of it covered my shoulder. I learned that some relationships begin with blood, but still have to grow back one careful inch at a time. While I searched for my daughter, I also began dealing with the other war Daniel had created. When Reed Medical Technologies was founded, my parents had provided the seed capital and I had received 42% of the shares. After Noah's birth, I gave my board seat to a proxy and reduced my involvement. Daniel slowly began acting as if the company belonged to him alone. An independent audit found that he had used forged electronic approvals to dilute my voting rights in 2 financing rounds. He had also moved company money into a foundation controlled by Richard, then used that money to pay for Vanessa's apartment and monthly silence. He assumed I would never review the complicated reports because my attention was on the children. He was wrong. I did not post the children's identities online. I did not send DNA reports to reporters. I gave each piece of evidence to the people legally responsible for it: family court, prosecutors, hospital regulators, independent directors, and auditors. Daniel responded by telling everyone I was unstable. He told the board that the stress of Lily's placement had caused me to become paranoid. He told friends that I secretly tested children because I needed control. He filed for emergency custody of Noah and claimed I was too emotionally distressed to care for him. His filing included photographs of me crying outside the courthouse and a statement from a private investigator who had followed me to Portland. Daniel argued that my effort to find Sophie showed I intended to remove Noah from the only family he knew and replace him with my biological child. The accusation was cruel because it used the fear I had already been fighting inside myself. I answered it with records instead of outrage: Noah's school attendance, pediatric appointments, therapy sessions, daily schedules, and statements from the people who had actually watched me parent him. His teacher wrote that Noah became visibly anxious after visits with Daniel, but relaxed when I arrived. His therapist documented that he feared being sent to another mother if he made a mistake. The judge ordered both of us not to discuss the case with him outside therapy. Daniel violated that order within a week by telling Noah that I was trying to take him away from his real family. That decision damaged him more than anything I could have said. He called my parents and offered to restore part of my ownership if they convinced me to stop the audit. My father asked him one question. You hid my daughter's child for 5 years, and now you want to bargain with her using shares that already belong to her? In family court, Daniel's attorney focused on the wound he thought would shame me. Mrs. Reed, if Noah is not your biological son, why are you seeking continued custody? Noah sat beside my attorney, rubbing his fingertips together the way he always did when frightened. I looked at him before I answered. Because for 5 years, whenever he was sick, scared, or woke from a nightmare, the person he called was me. Vanessa was missing and Daniel was under criminal investigation. The judge found a serious risk that he might interfere with evidence or move Noah to another jurisdiction. Noah remained in my care, and Daniel was prohibited from unsupervised contact while the case continued. The company's 10th anniversary gala was scheduled for a luxury hotel downtown. Daniel refused to cancel it. He believed that once the new investment agreement was signed, the board would be too afraid to remove him. He even planned to announce an expansion of Richard's charitable foundation and present our supposed adoption of Lily as proof of the Reed family's compassion. 2 hours before the gala, the board held an emergency meeting. The audit report, forged signatures, related party transfers, hush money payments, and hospital access records were laid out one by one. Daniel rushed into the conference room and found me sitting across from his empty chair. He stared at me as if we had never met. "Do you have to destroy everything?" "I did not destroy it," I said. I stopped standing in front of the wreckage so no one else could see it. The board voted to suspend him as CEO, revoke his access to company bank accounts and payment systems, and refer the evidence to law enforcement. For several seconds after the vote, Daniel remained standing at the end of the table. "This company exists because of me," he said. One of the independent directors, a retired hospital president who had known us since the first funding round, answered him. "It exists because Claire's family financed it, Claire's clinical work gave it credibility, and hundreds of employees built it. You were trusted to lead it. You were not given permission to own everyone in it." Daniel looked at Richard for support. Richard stared down at the table. By then, investigators had already requested records from his foundation. For the first time in Daniel's life, his father had no protection left to offer. Daniel still walked out of the meeting and went downstairs to the ballroom. Hundreds of guests were seated beneath crystal lights. The giant screen behind the stage displayed photographs from 10 years of Reed family charity events. Daniel straightened his tie, stepped to the microphone, and attempted to announce the financing as planned. He had barely finished welcoming the guests when the screen changed. A formal board statement appeared in white letters. Due to material governance and financial concerns, Reed Medical Technologies has paused the current financing round and suspended Daniel Reed's authority as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The ballroom went silent. Independent directors and company counsel entered from the side of the stage and took control of the microphone. The announcement did not mention Lily, Noah, Sophie, DNA, or the hospital case. It referred only to forged authorizations, related party transfers, and possible criminal violations. I would not let 3 children become the evening's entertainment. Daniel came off the stage with a gray face and cornered me near the elevators. "We can still make an agreement," he whispered. "I will restore your shares. You can have the house. Just withdraw the hospital complaint and stop the company referral." I remembered him standing at our wedding, holding both my hands and promising he would never deceive me. "How many shares is my daughter worth?" I asked. His lips moved without sound. "You treated Noah as an heir, Lily as a shield, Sophie as a replacement, and me as an empty space you could fill with whatever story benefited you. You still think everything has a price." The elevator doors opened. 2 investigators and a representative from the prosecutor's office stepped out. Margaret was later charged with falsifying medical records, identity fraud, and participating in the unlawful transfer of newborns. The foundation Richard controlled was found to have received multiple improper transfers. At first, he refused to acknowledge Lily and fought to keep decision-making authority over her. Under the combined pressure of the paternity case, corporate investigation, and child welfare proceedings, he ultimately relinquished parental rights. Only then could Lily become eligible for adoption by a stable family. Vanessa was found 3 months later. She tried to explain her actions by describing how Daniel had humiliated and abandoned her. But she could not explain away the fact that she knowingly accepted another woman's baby as part of an exchange, collected the money, and surrendered the child weeks later. She admitted that the photographs and medical bills had been fabricated. In exchange for cooperation, prosecutors agreed to consider a reduced charge. What Daniel could not accept was not losing the company or watching Richard fall. It was Noah choosing to stay with me. During one supervised visit, Daniel leaned toward him and said, "I am your real father." Noah looked at him seriously. "You were always my dad," he said. But a real dad would not send a baby to the wrong mom. And he would not make mom cry all the time. Daniel's face emptied. I had not taught Noah those words. Children sometimes understand responsibility long before adults do. Blood can identify a parent. It cannot perform the job of being one. 1 year later, I returned to cardiothoracic surgery. I kept my ownership in Reed Medical Technologies, but no longer handled daily operations. Under a new management team, the company was restructured. I used part of the money recovered from the illegal transfers to establish a legal aid program for children affected by identity record errors, unlawful adoption, and family separation. Lily was adopted by a couple trained in trauma-informed care. They knew her entire history and promised to tell her the truth in a way she could understand as she grew older. Sometimes she mailed me drawings. In one, there was a yellow house, 2 trees, and 4 people holding hands. On the back she wrote, "Aunt Claire, I have my own room now." Noah continued living with me. He knew I was not his biological mother, and he knew Vanessa was the woman who gave birth to him. We did not force the entire truth on him in one cruel conversation. With the help of a child psychologist, we let him understand his history slowly, in language that matched his age. Sophie began spending 1 weekend a month with me in Seattle. The first overnight visit was harder than any of us expected. Sophie became homesick before dinner and cried because my towels smelled different from Rachel's. Noah, who had spent weeks worrying that I would love my biological child more, refused to share the bathroom stool and then felt ashamed when Sophie cried. I called Rachel instead of pretending everything was perfect. We put her on speakerphone, and she talked Sophie through the bedtime routine while I sat on the floor beside the bed. The next morning, Noah offered Sophie the blue cereal bowl without being asked. Progress did not look like a dramatic reunion. It looked like awkward breakfasts, 2 calendars on the refrigerator, therapy appointments, and adults keeping promises even when the children were angry with us. She still called Rachel Mom. She called me Claire. I never corrected her. One evening, after I read both children a story, I stood to leave the room. Sophie reached for my sleeve. "Claire," she whispered, "can someone have 2 moms?" I crouched beside the bed. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "Yes," I said. "Someone can absolutely have 2 moms." She thought about that. "Can I call you Mom sometimes?" "Not every day. Just when I feel like it." I nodded. Noah was standing in the doorway with his pillow under one arm. He gave an exaggerated sigh. "Does that mean I have to share my mom now?" Sophie lifted the blanket. "You can have half the bed." They squeezed together and immediately began arguing about who got to sit closer to me. I sat between them and listened to their voices fill the room. The 5 years stolen from us would never return. But from that moment on, no one else would decide whom we were allowed to love, whom we were allowed to call family, or what kind of life we were allowed to build.